this week in Geopolitics. Geopolitics, there is another conflict of the proof of weapons network that your news is not telling you about. Nothing is being reported, despite a massive amount of death and destruction that is being required for this. And so normally we focus on the Ukraine-Russia side, and normally we focus on the Israel-Palestine side so that we can get ahead and understand what's happening. But this week in Geopolitics, I want to draw some attention to something that is not getting the attention and is in fact a vital part of the proof of weapons network that we need to make sure we understand. And that is that Congo, the Democratic Republic of Congo, is currently a major target for the proof of weapons network right now as we speak. And there is very little attention being drawn to it. And I want to make sure that in the geopolitical side, we understand the relevance and how it actually relates to the Ukraine-Russia conflict, as well as the Israel and Palestine conflict right now. So while we have been completely focused on those two conflicts, and we have also been focused on US and Panama and Greenland and European Union and China and Taiwan and US and everything that's happening there are actually many more conflicts that are happening in the African regions and the African nations that we have to understand, because they are being covered up and painted as something different to what is actually happening as we speak. But of course, we follow the money. And when you follow the money, you get a different narrative to when you listen to the politicians and you follow the news. And so let's dig into what we need to know and what we need to understand so that we can watch what is happening in Africa right now and the Democratic Republic of Congo and understand how they all relate together, because there is no isolation here. Right. So as we currently speak right now, Rwanda is conquering land from the Democratic Republic of Congo. Let's call it DRC. DRC has 10 times more population than Rwanda and 80 times more land than Rwanda, and yet it is currently having its government overthrown by Rwanda, by militias. And there was an invasion, or there was a one-day event, just like October the 7th, that had 3,000 to 4,000 soldiers that crossed over into the Democratic Republic of Congo on January the 25th. And it's led to, since then, 7,000 deaths. These deaths and this invasion is being supported by a group called M23. And M23 is an armed militia group. And we need to follow the money to understand what is that and who's it controlled by. When you get the answer, you will know that M23 is directed, armed, and funded by the Rwandan government, but claims to be completely independent of it. The Rwandan government, through its militia M23, has sieged control and captured basically the capital of a 1 million population that is leading to forced displacement as we speak. The United Nations has said that on 25th of January, which is a date that no one's talking about, like 7th of October, that 3,000 civilians lost their life and 700,000 were forcibly displaced. That is 3 times bigger than October the 7th, and yet very little interest from the Western world or the media is placed upon that. Why? Because now we know that the media is fully funded by NGOs and organizations that are part of the proof of weapons network that prints the money, that causes the inflation, that is used in order to get back to the military industrial complex so that their stock prices can be used in order to borrow against it, so that then those debts and can be used in order to make you think that there are these crazy regions around the world as people resist against the proof of weapons network, but is actually through covert operations and intelligence agencies funding these groups. And the media is being used in order to think that we are completely superior and we are the civil ones. And why can't they just get their act together? And why are we sending money over there? Well, they are being used to arm and overthrow the entire government of the Congo, the DRC, the Democratic Republic of Congo. So, who is behind Rwanda? Let's follow the money and understand. And how does this connect to everything else that we're saying? So, the Rwandan government is claiming no connection to M23. They're saying that they are only sending their army into the DRC because they are protecting the ethnic minority Rwandans in DRC. And billions of dollars of gold, or billions of dollars worth of gold, tin, and coltan, a mineral or a rare earth mineral, which is needed in order to have essential parts for laptops and phones and smartphones, have essentially been taken out through these M23 occupations, taken out of the territory that's being occupied by M23, and suddenly Rwanda, that has none of these minerals, is the largest exporter in the world, all coming out from Rwanda, which is, we're told, has all these rare earth minerals, but actually has none of them. And where are they being exported to? Well, they're going out to the US, of course, that needs rare earth minerals. It's going out to the European Union that needs rare earth minerals. And the last time that something like this happened, in 1998, it led to 3 million people being killed. In 1994, there was a Rwandan genocide that led to 800,000 minority, what they called the Tutsi. Sorry if I got that wrong. The Tutsi population completely being genocided in order to make sure that everything was lined up for these resources. To put that in context, that was 11% of the entire Rwandan population. 2 million of those ended up as refugees in the DRC, the Democratic Republic of Congo. This led to the First Congo War, and later that led in 1998 to a second Congo War that was led by Rwanda and Uganda in order to take over certain occupations and territories. And this alliance led to what was called the African World War, and later the peace negotiations that were negotiated between 2002 and 2003, right after the whole dot-com boom and bust, when the industry was recollaborating to the industry that is reliant upon laptops and later smartphones. And that was exactly in 2000, if you remember, the reason I became such a geek 25 years ago, because my father lost all of his money in the dot-com boom and bust and asked me to figure out and follow the money and find out what actually happened to his money. Later that led to me, obsessing over money and trying to get into monetary reform. And then monetary reform led me to when Satoshi Nakamoto launched Bitcoin, speaking in 2011 at the first Bitcoin conference. That led to a financial freedom that eventually led to being able to support my whole family and reward my father, who later passed away during the Proof of Weapons Network takedown of FTX and Celsius. The reason why I ended up a creditor, because I borrowed against some of my Bitcoin. I believe everything happens for a reason. But anyway, a bit of a tangent. I find that interesting that it was around that time that we had what was essentially one of the worst wars since World War II. And yet, because this is happening in Africa and the net beneficiaries are the Proof of Weapons Network, we barely even hear about it. It's barely even covered. 3,000 people in one day, 3 times more than October the 7th. And look at the difference in narrative. Look at the difference in exposure to what's happening. This, I put it, is another part of the Proof of Weapons Network. And we need to understand how these groups get funded in order to follow the money and understand how this whole operation is continued. This, in fact, that war was the deadliest war since World War II, as I said, with either 3 million to 5.5 million deaths over that. As a result of this destabilization, which is constructed from the Proof of Weapons Network, in order to make sure that the minerals that are needed and the resources that are needed get to where they're meant to go based upon funding these rebel groups and militias through intelligence agencies, as we know and we've covered in previous episodes. We now have approximately, it led to about 100 different rebel groups and militia groups that emerged, including the M23 that is currently in the DRC, that is leading to this death and destruction and essentially pirating of resources that has made Rwanda the largest exporter as well. The way this actually works, and I think this is the beginning of the topic and the research that I've been putting together, is Rwanda started taking all of the money that it was exporting, the money that was being relieved, and investing in its army and really, really building up the Rwandan army to a large degree, and created basically a business model based upon trading with the West and the US, the UK, the European Union are the key investors in the model, where the money was used in order to build up the Rwandan army. And then the Rwandan army led to a growing economy, and then a growing economy that was based upon taking out the resources of different, pirating essentially the resources of different regions. This actually led to, the DRC, which has those resources. It was also how Israel, the proxy, was used in order to extract all of the blood diamonds. Do you remember the Blood Diamond movie? And much of the industry. This is how the model was actually followed. So within Rwanda and Democratic Republic of DRC, you have many Israeli tycoons, as you did in apartheid South Africa. And you have these different industries that are protecting these different resources. Rwanda has the second largest contribution of soldiers to basically the United Nations peacekeeping missions. And so Rwanda developed through training, very advanced training, through Western intelligence of that army, a model that essentially led to soldiers as a service. And so when we had these peacekeeping missions, the Rwandan army is the second largest contributor of soldiers. And so this model of renting out soldiers in order to occupy different regions that then lead to conflicts with other proxies. Remember, we talked about the whole how ISIS and the Islamist PSYOP is a Zionist PSYOP in order to take proxies of Israel, call them ISIS, and then you can go into that region in order to say you're combating terrorism, and then you're able to basically have justification for wars and bombing of regions by having one of your militias fight another one of those militias, and then you can install a dictator and you say you're exporting democracy in order to ensure that those resources can be used purely for that, and you can expand the model, and that's basically what has come of the Rwandan model from following all the money. This basically creates that soldiers as a service model, and the proxy wars. And remember, you're only told in Western media that there's only one country doing that. Who's that? You're told that it's just Iran that's doing that, and they're funding militias and proxies. And who are they funding? Well, they're funding the resistance against the occupation of the construct of the foreign entity, which is the Rothschild-created Israel government that was designed in order to prop up and create the petrodollar and all of these psyops in the first place, and push back against any resistance, i.e. the Palestinian cause, which is why Iran is funding these different proxies, and they have their own agendas as well. But an example of this was in 2021, when essentially the Central African Republic, it contracted the Rwandan army, and it also constructed the Russian Wagner group, which is another similar group on the Russian side. And it hired those, different groups in order to push back against the rebels that were invading the capital at the time. And then you had Mozambique use them as well in order to push back against an insurrection from what it says is fighting terrorism through ISIS. Now, we know that ISIS is weaponized through the US and Israeli intelligence and the deep state in order to create the fake war on terror 2.0, which will be further exposed through the different documents that hopefully get dropped with the 9/11 files and the various other things that we've said were Mossad operations in order to justify that in conjunction with CIA operations, and Saudi Arabia, where these different, an essential part of the petrodollar that was negotiated, and you have these groups that were pushed through. I did a whole thread on this. I don't want to go deeper into that. But anyway, you can take over a region and have the piracy of these resources by saying that we'll have one of our militia groups fighting another one of our militia groups, and Israel, UK, US proxies are all fighting each other in order to take over those various resources and flow the resources through the proof of weapons network, and say that you're exporting democracy when clearly there is a deep state where the central bank sits on top, the intelligence agency sits underneath, and we have these fake democracies with left and right to distract you from what's actually really happening when you follow the money. The Rwandan army, originally it was supported by France because they need to protect their French interests. There's various regions that are stuck on the French franc, proof of weapons network and colony when that was replaced by euro, but it led behind it these different colonies that are then pegged their currency to the European Central Bank and various other things, and you have these different regions there. But France had a $20 billion project, which is a company you may have heard of, Total. And remember the PSYOPs with Iran, which is replace the democratically elected with a CIA and MI5 operation in 1953 to protect when Iran wanted to nationalize its oil that led to the Iranian Revolution in 79, because they wanted to use the oil, which was the oil for British Petroleum. And so the Rwandan side is there to protect Total, which is needs to be protected. And so that's where you have the birth of all of these different militia and deep state operations. Remember, across the whole region, you have these different French colonies, regions, that if you listen to the resistance against it in these regions that suffer from such corruption and destabilization, and dictators and various other things, they say this is France doing neocolonialism in the region. If you listen to Niger, if you listen to Chad, if you listen to Senegal, if you listen to these various things, it is saying that the French government is using this new neocolonial model, and so is the UK, Israel, and US, by using Rwanda and this soldier as a service in order to occupy and fight these proxy wars, that are various other things. And so France has sent so far $500 million into developing aid in Rwanda. And remember what we know from the USAID, that none of that money gets to the aid and what it's meant to be getting to, because it ends up with some of it funding these different militia groups into training camps, and paying all the bribes and everything that needs to happen in order to make sure that the investment comes right back into the region and not to the people that are suffering from all of these installed dictators as well. The EU has sent tens of millions of euros into safeguarding Total in Mozambique. Rwanda has now become essentially a Western militia and an army in order to pirate the different rare earths, oil, and gas resources that are needed in order to win this AI warfare across the entire African region. Basically, they basically are calling Rwanda, framing it in the region, the Singapore of Africa. It's the one that we need to support. And who does Rwanda sponsor when you flow the money? How does the money get back once it comes in? Well, they sponsor Arsenal. And Rwanda is also a chief sponsor of the Grand Prix. And Rwanda is also a sponsor of the NBA. And if it flows the money back in, then it can attract tourism, which brings people into the region. So it's the largest region for tourism that can expand the GDP. And relative to all the other parts of the region, Rwanda has been growing at 8% per year off the back of the genocide that led to everything that is being happening right now in taking over the the Democratic Republic of Congo, the DRC government. And $1.3 billion in Western aid was received into Rwanda in order to prop up the proof of weapons network as well. This is the highest amount of aid in the entire region. And what does it actually mean? It means that, of course, Rwanda is Western protecting democracies, and therefore, because the money comes back, if you keep a dictator in that is engaging in supporting M23 in order to pirate resources, we can call it a democracy rather than a dictator, and we don't need to sanction it because it's backed by the very militias that are designed in order to get those resources out as well. Essentially, when you see M23 on the news, if they report anything about it, it is a Western militia in order to pirate resources so that Rwanda can then flow the money into the proof of weapons network, and you'll get a very, very different version of the story. The DRC, the Democratic Republic of Congo, their rare earths and their metals are essentially being stolen, and they're being exported to the West. And Rwanda is the largest exporter, even though it has none of those resources. Just as India took the sanctioned Russian gas and oil and then exported it back to Europe, and then they added the price increase so that America could end up exporting its gas, you end up with these stupid games in the proof of weapons network that is hidden behind obfuscation, control of media, and meant to trick you into thinking what is happening in those regions are very different. This is why the African regions, if they get a chance to fight against the proof of weapons network, can hopefully rebuild their financial system. And who was the person that tried to do that? Gaddafi from Libya, that wanted to build a gold-backed Pan-African currency to fight back against the proof of weapons network. And what were you told who Gaddafi is and what he's doing? Through the media that props up the proof of weapons network, so you could topple that regime and ensure that a gold-backed, debt-free, Islamic finance-based financial system to push to unify the different Pan-African regions as a resistance movement against the proof of weapons network was never allowed to happen. Just as it happened when it was built in Lebanon and Iraq and in Syria, you can see the pattern. And so this ties into the construct of the propping up of the euro dollar, the propping up of the petrodollar, in order to prop up the Federal Reserve debt-based Ponzi scheme that ties in all of our history. And we can see it happening right in front of our eyes as well. Now, why are we not told about that one while we're exposing the other parts of it? Because those rare earth minerals are needed in order to get the proof of weapons network retreated into a stablecoin AI standard. And those resources are needed while we figure out what's going to happen to Ukraine, Greenland, and the Middle East as it retreats back. And why actually many of the regions where China was investing as part of their Belt and Road Initiative suddenly ended up with overthrows of governments, death and destruction, insurrections, and Western-backed militias coming in as well. So Rwanda has no resources of its own, and yet suddenly it's the largest exporter of coltan, which is essential for producing smartphones and laptops for us. So DRC has the largest amount of it. It's the largest amount of coltan in the region. And it has the largest amount of reserves in the world. And Rwanda, a US and EU proxy, ends up in a different region fighting ISIS, which is an Israeli and US proxy, is in a war in order to justify occupation and occupy the land and take over the land and take those minerals so that they can be exported via the democracies that are being waged and warred, paid for by the US taxpayer, middle-class America getting wiped out through inflation. And when there's 9% inflation in America, there's 900% inflation in Zimbabwe, so that they can shut down any resistance against that by controlling the proof of weapons network and the Bank for International Settlements and the International Monetary Fund and the World Bank and the construct that they've developed in order to make sure that any resistance against it is stamped out. And of course, Rwanda is suddenly the largest exporter of coltan from the Democratic Republic of Congo. And we're told about these crazy M23 militias. And the largest recipient of the Rwandan coltan, just so you know, is Intel. And Intel is being split up as we speak. We're meant to be told this is capitalism in order to make sure that it is being split across the different companies. They're going to be building the semiconductor chips within America as well. Okay, so I just wanted to tie together that in the geopolitical section. And just so you know, the European Union has signed a memorandum of understanding in 2023 to make sure that it increases imports of the DRC stolen coltan via Rwanda as well. M23 has now generated approximately $800 million in revenue for the Rwandan government. And DRC is essentially now losing $1 billion in 2023 as a result of this M23 occupations of the militias as well. There's no sanctions that go to Rwanda as a result of this. And instead, Rwanda is contributing its troops to other regions that we'll have to cover in future episodes and future geopolitical sections of the Proof of Weapons Network, like Sudan, like Central African Republic. And so those models are being used. And what are we doing in those regions? We're told that they're fighting against the Islamist regime, which was a Western intelligence agency word designed to justify the fake war on terror 2.0 that they were creating in order to trick you and prop up the petrodollar. Anyway, so what you're seeing right now is Congolese protesters. They're being attacked by essentially militias of US, France, Belgium, Japan, Rwanda, Uganda, that is propping up the M23 invasion, and all of the proxy wars that we're seeing right now. And of course, they're saying that they're doing this in order to protect the region, because it could spark off essentially a regional war. And how does that connect to what's happening with the other region? Well, obviously, Israel is a construct in order to deconstruct that. Who is surrounded by all of this? Well, Egypt. Egypt is surrounded by Sudan. Egypt is surrounded by Libya. Sudan was toppled for this very reason, for the resources. Libya was where Gaddafi was going to create the gold-backed currency for the unification of the Pan region. And so you get these different groups that are designed in order to wipe them out. And who else is Egypt surrounded by? Lebanon, surrounded by Palestine, and has a border which is being negotiated right now in order to stop entering into phase 2 of the peace negotiations and the ceasefire of the Palestinian region right now. And so these are all connecting because essentially Egypt is being asked to take the refugees from Gaza, from West Bank, from Libya, and from Sudan, as you have this expansionist vision in order to make sure that the resources get back to where the Greater Israel Project is designed to get it to. Proxy war after proxy war. I hope by following the money you understand that. And now we're being told that on the media, M23, they want to overthrow the entire Democratic Republic of Congo government. And next, they want to take over the capital. And Uganda has aspirations of taking over Kenya. And we're seeing the student riots that led to shootings and various other things. The network goes on and on and on. Artificial constructs in order to destabilize regions so that the resources can be used in order to prop up the Proof of Weapons network that we've covered as well. If this leads to a second, essentially African war, then we need to make sure that we're watching this. And that's why you have different proxies. You know, it could be pushed to with Wagner and Russia and China, various Belt and Road initiatives and various other things. So we need to make sure that we follow the money and understand exactly the games that are being played in this region. You know, I believe that we are seeing a strategic retreat from the Middle East as we transition, but we also need to see the strategic retreat of US and all those bases from Africa as well. And that's kind of why I won't go too deep into it right now, but that's why a territorial or information war was waged against the US Proof of Weapons network and South Africa as well. I'll keep following those and we'll cover those in other regions. The very final part of the geopolitical section, I just want to make sure that we give all the updates that happened this week in the Russian-Ukrainian conflict and as well in the Israeli-Palestinian conflict. Now, how you can see how the Congolese M23 invasion for resources is also tied into many of these proxy wars and proof of weapons network intelligence agency operations. Right. So if you remembered what I covered last week, let's start with the Israeli-Palestine conflict. I said that we entered into a ceasefire, and the strategic interest of America is to retreat and have a two-state solution. But Israel wants to draw America into war by occupying the territory so that it can then push it into a war with Iran, so that Israel can find itself in the middle and center between the artificial intelligence war between America and China, and it can position itself right in the middle and having the technology and all the cyber security so that it can control those different units. And it wants to hold on to the Greater Israel Project, which was a construct of the British Empire and then handed over to America. But America no longer needs it because it was going to lose the war to China, as I covered in the macro section earlier today as well. Right. So let's get right down to the micro. What did we see last weekend? So last Saturday, after Bitcoin Hard Talk episode 71, last Friday, Hamas released the 6 hostages as per the ceasefire agreement, which was double the number. It said that it would release 6 instead of 3 as a gesture to get to phase 2, where Israel then has to leave the border between Egypt and the West Bank, and Gaza, and that they need to leave that region, which was the negotiation in phase 2. And so Israel immediately decided that it wanted to stop the release of the 620 Palestinian hostages that were meant to be released in exchange for the 6 Palestinian hostages. So once again, Israel breached the ceasefire agreement, and we enter into these behind-the-scenes negotiations while Trump puts the narrative out there in order to make sure that he's satisfying the Zionist control, members, making sure that the Israel and America relationship looks strong at the front. But my speculation is that they're fighting in the background because of this new world order. Israel wants to get America into war to keep the old model of the proof of weapons network, and Trump wants to retreat towards focusing on America first as well. And so Netanyahu came out and he blocked the release. He cited that the objection to releasing the 620 Palestinians were because of the ceremonies where Hamas, essentially every time it releases the Israeli soldiers, it has these kind of propaganda ceremonies where it shows the Israeli soldiers, hostages coming out. Some of them were soldiers, other them as civilians, and they come out and then they look in good shape, and so they release the videos showing that the exchange happens, and then you see all the Palestinian hostages coming out, and they are subject to all the torture and everything that they've been subjected to. Netanyahu decided that it's because of that they won't release the 620 Palestinian hostages, and also the dead bodies. We covered this last week of the 4 that Hamas claimed were killed due to Israeli bombing, and Israel were killed by Hamas. Those 4 bodies were returned, and they needed to do an investigation into it, and they claimed that the mother was not the right body, and so they needed to delay that, and so they needed to call off the ceasefire. And so last weekend it didn't go through as needed or as agreed, and so we're nearing the very end of phase 1, and Israel or the Israeli government are trying to stop it getting to phase 2, where the soldiers have to retreat, and Israel stops occupying the border between Egypt and Gaza. But the Israeli government has said, if you allow that to happen, Then the coalition government said, you have to go back to war. We want to continue this. And Netanyahu could risk toppling the Israeli government if he doesn't go back to war and he continues with peace. And so there is a big issue with that. But right up until the final moment on Thursday, and I believe it's because the American negotiators, the Egyptian negotiators, and the GCC are forcing the Israeli government in Netanyahu's hand. On Thursday, you got the release of the 620 Palestinian hostages. They were returned, and they were still subject to all the torture, abuse, and just looking like absolute victims of crimes against humanity. They all come out on Thursday. And this coincides, when I'm following the money, between the negotiations that are happening between the US, Hamas, the GCC, and they're pushing to get to phase 2, which is a 2-state solution and a lasting peace agreement that they're tying up and tying into the Saudi Arabia meeting and the peace agreement between the Russia and Ukrainian conflict as well. And so, as I said, this is a problem for what the Israeli government are saying that what they want. And this is in direct conflict with what the Israeli protesters are pushing for as well. And so all of this is coming into what is hopefully the dismantling of the corrupt Israeli government, and hopefully the moving towards a 2-state solution that we could potentially have, and peace in the region, just based upon the AI war between China and America that I covered last week as well. Well, anyway, Israel is pushing to try and get US more and more involved in Iran. The strategic goal, sorry, not right now, but the goal is to get America to occupy Gaza. Then they can expand and have America deliver the Greater Israel Project, which is the opposite of the Trump administration's goal or stated goal. So that can push to Iran, and then all the escalation towards World War III, so that Israel can sit between and stop, that Israel is no longer useful to the New World Order and America model. And so then you have to just have a 2-state solution and getting on with your neighbors. And so the coalition government has stated that if phase 2 happens, then they will leave, and that breaks up the Israeli Netanyahu coalition government. And therefore, when you have a deconstruction of the government, you may end up with peace. And that's the problem that those people are looking at, whatever the Israeli politics is coming from there. The US, as I said, is deconstructing the deep state, as we covered in the macro section, retreating towards that AI side and competing with China. And they cannot afford to be in any forever war. It will lead to the loss of the regional power that they want to be after the deconstruction of the proof of weapons network. And they're trying to protect Israel's reputation at the same time as knowing that Israel's causing a problem and getting in the way of peace right now, which is getting in the way of their documents, their strategic goals, which is why we're having these releaser files. Is it going to be the one that blames Mossad and reveals, the Mossad operations, or is it going to be the one that just blames it on the CIA with all the files? That is the leverage to try and push Israel into making sure that there is a 2-state solution, self-determination for the Palestinians and self-determination for the Israeli state, but without being funded with the proof of weapons network to topple and destabilize the regions. So Hamas have come out, and obviously you don't get any of this in traditional media, but they've confirmed that they are now willing to step aside. They don't want to be the government if there is new leadership determined, which America would pick the Palestinian Authority, which is a puppet US government, obviously. But Hamas has said they would step aside because Palestinian Authority is in charge of West Bank, and Israel is trying to make sure that the Palestinian Authority doesn't exist anymore, because that is where US want to install as their puppet government in a 2-state solution. And the Israeli government will not allow for a 2-state solution. They want the full sticks. They want to get rid of all the Palestinians. And phase 1 ends as per the ceasefire agreement on the 1st of March. In phase 2, what's meant to happen? Well, before it gets to phase 2, phase 1 is that they're meant to take the 60,000 mobile homes and support Palestinians that in the humanitarian aid. They're holding those aid. It's not getting in. The mobile aid isn't getting in. And there was meant to be the 200,000 tents that were meant to help Palestinians survive the bad weather as they enter into Eid, which starts now. And so Israel doesn't want those to get through because that may mean that the two-state solution is going to happen. So all of the stalling tactics are happening from Netanyahu. All of those are happening. And it has basically made a statement that the IDF will not do what it was agreed in phase 2. The IDF will not retreat from the Egypt-Gaza border, which is what needs to happen in phase 2. And so we're stalling. We're meant to get there before the 1st of March. And that is what I think determines whether we get the full truth of the Epstein files or the 70% truth of the Epstein files. That's why I think all this coincides as well. And obviously, there are very many different agendas of the neocon vision and the neocon Zionist vision and all the internal politics within America and all the different factions within the deep state at the moment. An Israeli official came out and said that they will not leave. The Palestinian Authority has now been banned from the West Bank, which is the media outlet that was reporting what's happening in the West Bank. And that's exactly what happened as they escalated the genocide in Gaza. And now the West Bank has displaced, which has nothing to do with the conflict, 40,000 Palestinians from the West Bank. And Israel has now sent in tanks, which have now deployed across the West Bank as well. And so they're now targeting areas that are governed by the Palestinian Authority, which is the US puppet government, to make sure that the US doesn't get its puppet government for the two-state solution. And that's got nothing to do with Hamas, and yet they're doing that within the West Bank. And this is essentially the conflict that I think we're seeing, because Israel prefer Hamas to be in charge, because that's the justification for bringing the US into the proxy war so that they can get the escalation that they want to justify their vision of that as well. The defense minister of Israel, what's his name, Katz, he actually announced that the Israeli troops will remain in certain areas in the West Bank for up to a year, which is the complete opposite of the ceasefire agreement. And that's completely preventing the return of tens of thousands of displaced Palestinians from the West Bank right now. Now, with the protesters that are protesting within Israel, i.e. the families of, I believe there's 62 more hostages, Israeli hostages to be released, the Israeli families have stated that Netanyahu wants to return to the war against Israelis' interest and without the hostages, and use the hostages in order to justify keeping on to his political career so that Netanyahu doesn't get displaced as well. And so the Israeli hostages are protesting against that. The protesters within Israel are urging the government to accept Hamas's offer to return all of the hostages earlier, move to a two-state solution, and Hamas step aside for probably the Palestinian Authority, which is the US puppet government. And then Trump can say, we got this region, they can retreat, and they don't need to prop up all the proxy wars. And Israel can essentially be enforced to a two-state solution by the GCC, Saudi Arabia, and the power regions as well. To fight back against that, Israel also put out fighter jets over Lebanon last week as well, and just escalated military action, which all coincides with the meetings between Egypt and Jordan and the GCC, the Gulf Cooperation countries, who are preparing to reveal the phase 2 plan, which likely involves the two-state solution and the retreat of the illegal occupation enforced by a security deal between America and Saudi Arabia, as I outlined last week in the New World Order meeting as well. And so that is what I think is actually happening right now. Trump basically came out and at the same time, he's trying to do reversal of the euro-dollar one as well. And so that's everything that happened this week. And so now we're back to on the 1st of March, and we'll cover what happens next week, whether we get into phase 2, which I believe could only be pushed by America defunding Israel, or we end up with some kind of false flag escalation operation and a delay of phase 2, which is a real net disadvantage for America and a massive strategic advantage for Israel, as I believe those are on opposite sides right now. Right, at the same time, let's have a look at the Russian and Ukrainian conflict, and then we can wrap everything up and get ready for what happens next week. So Trump has basically come out and said, let's go through the tit for tat that happened. He reversed the narrative, the US aid-funded narrative that Putin is Hitler and is trying to take over the whole of Europe, that the EU is still doing, and said that he's in very good talks with Putin, and he's not in such good talks with Ukraine. And so there was that massive tit for tat between Zelensky and Trump. And suddenly, when Zelensky's visiting the White House, which is happening as we speak, I'll cover what happens next week. Basically, he was saying in the press release, you called Zelensky a dictator, and Trump said, for diplomatic reasons, did I say that? No, I think Zelensky's a good guy, and we're going to be meeting, and we're going to sign a rare earth deal, and we're going to get the deal done, and just pushed everything back towards getting the deal done before the EU warmongers, neocons, can try and get the deal in their favor. And that's why we're seeing this negotiation try to rush forward. And then managing all of these different things. So Zelensky basically came out and said, that $350 billion of frozen Russian funds, those assets belong to Ukraine. And so he's trying to get leverage there. Zelensky also said that he'd be willing to quit his role in exchange for NATO membership. Trump came out and said that sanctions discussions can carry on with Putin to end the war in Ukraine, and a major economic deal can likely take place between the US and Russia. And so you can see the deal that's trying to be put together around that. Ukraine trying to get leverage there. It's already been determined that it can't be in a NATO membership, because we know the PSYOP and the CIA operation, the bit that Trump's not telling you that we've covered in previous broadcasts as well. And everything we covered in the macro section, the deal that is looking to be put through, which is all about the rare earth minerals. And Trump is looking essentially for what seems to be, and we'll get an announcement, maybe the announcement has happened while we're live, like a $500 billion rare earth mineral deal on the lines of some kind of 50-50, where they'll do the digging. Ukraine gets to, apparently has about $3 trillion of assets. And then EU's involved in that, and US is involved in that. And then because they're there, they get some type of security. But the reality is that Putin never wanted to actually expand across. It was actually in reaction to the reason that this happened, the PSYOP of the NATO expansion and the blowing up of the Nord Stream pipeline that Trump can't tell you about as well. So now the issue is that the rare earths are mostly in the Russian occupied territory. And this is why EU is not pushing normalization, but pushing, let's take the 350 billion and let's use that to invest in the military industrial complex and the old model, basically the model that is owned. And what is really interesting is we had for the first time a United Nations meeting where the proxies the people that are able to veto vote any UN resolution, which is UK, France, China, Russia, and US. But now US and Russia are voting against the United Nations resolution that was trying to expand against Russia. And they're voting together for peace resolution against UK, France, and the other veto votes as well, which is really, really interesting to see. And really good sign as well that we're actually, again, pushing back on the petrodollar narrative and the eurodollar narrative and focusing on America first. Putin says that Russia is now ready to work together with the US on a rare earth minerals and steel deal as well. The Secretary of State of America, Marco Rubio, he came out and said that the US will not allow Ukraine to acquire nuclear weapons. So putting over the red lines. Besant from the American team as well warns that wants a rare earth minerals, but won't send troops to Ukraine. And so there won't be American troops in Ukraine, which is a problem to get in the way of the deal. And Russia came out and rejected returning any of the annexed Ukrainian territory and any of the lands as part of a deal. Remember, in the old videos, the 2023 deal, Zelensky basically said, in terms of how the US deal, you give us credit and we will pay you back after the war. So, we know that, Trump's pushing that narrative. The money was going back. Biden corrupted. It went into the corrupt deals. But that was the military-industrial complex, which is propped up by the proxy wars, which are the Mossad operations that make sure that the wars are actually escalated in the first place based upon the proof of weapons network. Basically, the hypocrisy of it all is shown, but we're okay with that as long as we get to peace model. And again, if you want these contracts to actually come out and say how they were actually done, surely there was a signed contract. They didn't just send the money over. Why not just open source the contracts? And so we can stop speculating on that, just like the JFK files and the Epstein files. You can just open source these contracts as well, but obviously as part of a negotiation as well. But the UK is, I believe, getting ready to... it said that it's now escalating a higher sanctions package that's trying to get leverage for the deal that they actually want to do, and also said it's going to be expanding its military spending to a higher percentage of its GDP, and that will be a good relationship with America and it's going to take more responsibility for its own, which is code word for more of the money coming into the UK military-industrial complex, the Germany military-industrial complex, and the French military-industrial complex, rather than the American military-industrial complex. And so, Prime Minister Starmer had the meeting with Trump, and it was a meeting that was, very much in line with the Trump narrative. And Starmer not really calling Putin a warmonger that wants to expand across Russia, but a little bit of the narrative in order to save face. And then that positions him in order to negotiate, as I said, in the macro section between the European Union and America, trying to get to whatever the agreement and whatever's going to be announced that ends this war once and for all. What the $350 billion of Russian assets are going to look like, and how you have troops, where those troops are, and UK negotiating between them. There was a little bit of a leak in AEN News. This is the final part, and then we're going to end it, which is traditionally, how it leaks is Ukraine intelligence. And it basically said that the deal that Zelensky wanted to do with Trump can't be done because Britain's already done that deal. And so all of those negotiations are going to be happening. And that's a reason for all of this, and all of them want to do the rare earth deal and remain whether Europe is relevant in the future of what this is all for. And so this time next week, we'll cover exactly what happens from Zelensky's visit. I did catch a little bit of it just before, and Trump was kind of trolling on Zelensky because he wasn't dressed in a suit, saying that he's wearing his best outfit today, which I thought was funny. But we will continue to follow the money, and that's everything I need to cover on the geopolitical section of this week in Geopolitics. I hope you understand now how the Congo side relates to the Israel-Palestine conflict and also the Ukraine-Russia conflict. And hopefully the new world order will be constructed in Saudi Arabia, and we can just deconstruct the petrodollar and the euro dollar once and for all. And we can move to the next evil, which is the AI stablecoin race and all the things that we've covered as we did this week in Bitcoin, this week in macro, and this week in geopolitics. So always remember, you are alive at one of the most interesting and exciting times in financial history. Many are going to get wrecked. Others are going to do well. And I want to make sure you're on the right side of this change. And so do me a favor. Please do subscribe, hit the bell symbol, hit all, help me get to 100,000 subscribers so I can remove the shadow ban, get the blue check, and make sure that this gets out to more people. Please put a comment below. And hopefully the language that I'm using doesn't get us banned. If not, follow me on Rumble. And I'll publish them on X, and also join the Bitcoin Hard Talk membership portal in case everything gets censored. We got our backup there where we back up everything in case it gets taken down by the Proof of Weapons network. But hopefully that doesn't need to happen. We can do it with peace, love, and unity. And I will see you for episode 73 of Bitcoin Hard Talk next week. Peace.